Okay, so in this segment, let's go ahead and talk about motivators other than money. So, and I think commonly people think that economists think that everything comes down to money and money is the only motivator. And I would say that, there probably is some degree to which that's a little bit of a fair criticism. Certainly, economists, I think, tend to go first to the monetary motivators and incentives, but I think we should be a little bit more broad-minded than that. And at the very least, we should think about social status and the idea of what we call corporate or organizational culture. And sort of the question often arises is, how do we get a good organizational culture? It's one thing to say, yeah, we should have an organizational culture that supports a certain kind of activity or way of doing things, but how do we actually do that? And the first step, I would say, is we first want to just realize that people are different, and people have different characters, different personalities. And yes, people will act differently in different organizations and different social settings and different cultures, but it's a lot easier to build and sustain a coherent culture if we select and screen for people who are consistent with that. So the idea here is that during, say, a hiring process, we want to screen for people who are consistent with our culture, who are a good match for our culture. And of course, that's on the employer side, screening by firms. On the other side, employees want to figure out, or potential employees, want to figure out how they signal, how they indicate or demonstrate or credibly signal, we talk about, that they are consistent with that corporate culture. And so one thing we see there is, something like, we think education is probably a good way of, signaling something about your personality and your abilities. Could be something like your participation in sports. Someone who participates in team sports probably has a different type of personality than someone who participates in a more individualistic sport. So say, for instance, baseball is going to be different than, say, wrestling, because there are different forms of personalities, and someone who's a team player is more likely to be in a team sport, and someone who's more individualistic may be in a more individual activity. Likewise, some people are going to be interested in activities where quality is the primary consideration and not necessarily paying attention to what the customer wants. So, in some activities that people do, there's an intrinsic motivation for quality. That's going to be correlated with someone who has a very independent notion of what the right way to do things is. That may or may not be a good thing. In some corporations, you may want people to be intrinsically devoted to quality in that way. In other organizations, you may be more interested in having people oriented towards a customer service mentality. And that different organizations just want different things. And the other thing I would say is, not only do we want to select the right people, we want to enforce and reinforce culture. And although when we talk about game theory, we talked about the prisoner's dilemma and sort of the normal outcome based on pure game theory that we expect, is that we end up in this bad equilibrium where everyone misbehaves and stabs each other in the back and all that kind of stuff. When you look at people's actual behavior, it's not quite so pessimistic. And in fact, it looks like a lot of times that a lot of people will start by playing nice, and as long as the other person doesn't defect, doesn't stab them in the back, they'll keep on playing nice. So, at a broader level here, a lot of workplaces essentially if workers see that everyone else is pulling their weight and doing a really good job, then most people will pull their own weight and do a good job. But if they see that some people are slackers and are not suffering for it, then they'll start to feel like chumps for not also slacking off. Why am I working so hard when Joe across the cubicle aisle, he doesn't do any work and he gets paid just as much as I do, so I should slack off too. So you need to either make sure that slackers are not rewarded or possibly sort of culled out of the pool. So slackers or people who are unethical, people who somehow game the system to try and inflate their sales quota, that sort of stuff. So slackers and cheaters basically have to be punished in some sense. Because if people don't see that the culture is enforced, then people will start to sort of opt out of that culture. They also need to see that success in the workplace is positively correlated with people who go above and beyond so that they can have role models for emulation. So you need to make sure that, so promotions function as an incentive, a material external incentive, but they also serve that sort of semi-external purpose of honoring people, right? A promotion is not just you get paid more, but it's also a recognition of someone's merit. And so it serves as an incentive beyond the purely monetary. So recognize that promotions are honors. And, making sure that promotions go to people who are acting in a way that's consistent with the highest corporate culture. And this all sounds probably relatively basic, but important things to keep in mind. That, we want to make sure that we keep in mind the sort of sociological context of what we're doing inside our organization. So our next lecture segment is going to delve a little bit deeper into that, and then that'll be the last I'll have to say on this.